We're here at the Doha Forum, and with me to talk about the state of the world is María Fernanda Espinosa, who's the President of the United Nations General Assembly. In the world at the moment, there's rising tensions in trade, but also in security. How concerned should we be about global cooperation at the moment?
Well, I think that indeed we need more cooperation, stronger multilateralism, a stronger United Nations, being capable of delivering for the people in need around the world. And it is true that some countries are opposing the narrative, saying it's either you are for globalization, international cooperation and inclusion, or you are with national interest and a more domestic approach. And the beauty of multilateralism that it fosters both. It is cross fertilization between the two. If you have stronger international cooperation, a stronger multilateral system, a stronger UN, more efficient, more capable to deliver, then you will have more power in the exercise of your national sovereignty. So the two of them go together, and we have to be careful about these very opposing narratives. The UN is more needed than ever, whether it be climate change, migration, international peace and security, human rights. We need more cooperation, more multilateralism, and not less.
And quite often the UN is seen as a rather ineffective body that world leaders can't agree, either at the General Assembly or in the Security Council. What role, what sort of good does it do? What do we need the UN for?
Well, I think that the United Nations has had several successes, but we tend to focus more on sometimes the weaknesses. But if you talk about the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda, which is the big a roadmap for the future of sustainable development, that is a UN creation that was an agreement between 193 states. If you look at the climate agenda, we have serious challenges. Climate change is really a survival challenge. It's an existential challenge. The only way to address climate change, whether you're a big country or a small country, is through international cooperation and using a multilateral framework. We just agree on a rule book for the Paris Agreement to be implemented. The only way to deal about disarmament issues, about refugees and migration, about conflict, regional conflict, is through a greater and stronger multilateral system. The United Nations, for example, just 2 days ago, was able to galvanize a ceasefire in Yemen that is so important for that conflict. It is a temporary, very focused ceasefire, but that would allow 70% of the aid to address the civilians that are in very difficult situations, to redress the humanitarian crisis in Yemen, because 70% of the goods and services can enter into Yemen because of the ceasefire that was galvanized with the support of the United Nations. We are now hosting peace dialogues in Geneva just last week to address the issue of the Western Sahara between the Moroccan authorities and the Western Sahara. This is has started last week and will continue in January. If you look at the Syrian issue, Geneva is also hosting a very important dialogue and conversation between Russia, Turkey, and Iran for a constitutional agreement in Syria. So the United Nations is more relevant today than ever, perhaps.
And when you look at one of these issues, so there's a lot going on, particularly in security and global cooperation and trying to end conflict. In terms of making life a better place for particularly the poorest people in the world, the Sustainable Development Goals, how confident are you that we're on track as a global community to meet these?
Well, unfortunately, we have to recognize that we have done pretty much a good job fighting poverty, but we still have to do a lot in fighting inequality. I come from a region, Latin America, the most unequal region in the world. So we really need affirmative action policies for inclusion and for, closing the gap of inequality around the world. If you have proper sustainable development, job opportunities for young people, women empowerment, the economic contribution of women to the economy, then you will be able to deliver better on the 2030 agenda, but more importantly, to prevent conflict. The preventive diplomacy approach, the sustaining peace approach is the UN approach. We are working very hard from the presidency of the General Assembly to have youth, the young people being architects of peace and security. We are doing a lot on that. We're working hard, for example, in beating plastic pollution in oceans, which is a major environmental threat of our days. So we are really walking the talk, doing what we need to do, and sometimes we need to translate better our work. The people need to know better what the UN does and how the UN contributes to make the planet a better place.
One thing about the world I think everyone agrees on is we've never been more connected, whether it's using our phones, social media. We can find out what's going on in other parts of the world at the click of a button, and yet there's a backlash against globalization, and some backlash in many countries against cooperation. There's with more nationalism, more my country first. How do you see this tension being resolved?
Well, I would say that we have really to realize that both things can coexist, as I mentioned at the beginning. You can defend national interests, which is totally fair, and exercise your national sovereignty and take the decisions that are good for the people you serve at the national level. But there are issues that are global challenges, and the only response is through the multilateral system. No matter if you're a big country or a small country, the only way to tackle terrorism, for example, the only way to tackle climate change, the only way to look at a potential new financial crisis, because IMF has just alerted us that there is a potential new financial crisis, is through collective action and global leadership. Global leadership and collective action, they have a house, they have a home, and the home is the United Nations. So we are really working to be fit for purpose. We are reinventing ourselves we are entering into a very profound reform process starting in January next year. We are revitalizing the General Assembly to deliver better, but there are things, and I repeat, that cannot be tackled in the go it alone kind of formula. It does not work. We need more collaboration, more multilateralism.
Unfortunately, one of the world's most important countries, the US, is doing exactly the opposite. The administration is going it alone on the trade front, on financial regulation, climate change. In fact, in all these areas you've been talking about, it's been wanting to develop its own policies and not take a global position. How much of a problem is that?
Well, I think we need, first of all, I think that multilateralism has a beauty, which is also to be prepared for dissent, for countries that for a reason or another are not prepared to join certain agreements. And that's perfectly fine. But, to be very frank, how can you tackle the issue of migration if countries of origin, of transit and destination do not work together? And this is not a bilateral arrangement. It has to come from the Global Compact on Migration that we just adopted in Marrakesh a few days ago. No, if you talk about climate change, yes, indeed, the United States, they decided that they will not join the Paris Agreement for the time being. But what is very encouraging is that we see hundreds of cities in the United States, individual states, taking really the responsibility to deliver on the Paris Agreement. And there are hundreds. The state of California, which is, I think, is the fifth or sixth economy, most powerful economy of the world, they're really taking the responsibility for the Paris Agreement. And in that particular case, local governments and organized citizenship, they really can make the difference.
So if you had one message for global leaders at the moment, what would it be?
Well, I think that we need to recommit to the UN Charter, to when we all agreed that we needed to build a more peaceful world, that would embrace everybody in their diversity, that we need human rights and we need sustainable development. So I think that we need to recommit to multilateralism, to give the value that the United Nations has as like the world platform to reach agreement on the fundamental issues and the fundamental global challenges of humanity. So we need more multilateralism, we need a better United Nations that is fit for purpose.
María Fernanda Espinosa, thank you very much.
Thanks to you, Chris.